wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Our best to you throughout your holiday. May there be some quiet moments with your family and your friends as you share the joy the season brings your way. So try to find a special kind of meaning among the gifts that lie beneath your tree. And have a Merry Christmas, yes, a very Merry Christmas. May it fill your life with love and peace. Enjoy the very special kind of magic that helps you find the joy in all you do. And have a Merry Christmas, yes, a very Merry Christmas. May the spirits last the whole year through. All year
Thank you for the beautiful singing of We're Wishing You a Merry Christmas. And now we have inspirational reading by me. And I'm taking it from the Revealing Word. It's a dictionary of metaphysical terms put out by the Charles Fillmore Reference Library. I read from Christ. Christ is the divine man. Jesus is the name that represents an individual expression of the Christ idea. Christ existed long before Jesus. It was the Christ mind in Jesus that exclaimed, "And now, Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." That's from John 17:5. And under the heading Christ and Jehovah. Jehovah of the Old Testament is the I Am, or Christ of God invisible. The Messiah is the promise of the Christ manifest of that I Am, or Christ. And Jesus Christ is the fulfillment in man of that original I Am, or Jehovah. And I wish to present to you a leader, a teacher, and just an everything wonderful Christ being, speaking on Christ awareness at Christmas, Reverend Arthur Hammons.
Good morning.
Good
stood here and you were so pretty in the light.
Oh.
And you all just wooed us. Okay, now it's time to do our spiritual work.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk to you and share some ideas with you that are near and dear to all of our hearts. We already know all of this, but it's wonderful, especially at this time of year, to be reminded of these truths, this truth that we know about ourselves, so that we're more grounded in it, we're more in touch with it, and then we're more of the one who expresses it. So I'm going to share with you information you already are an expert about. And during the process, maybe you'll, because your mind is multifaceted and it can go a million different places all at once, maybe you'll be in touch with when you first heard this and how it was just so wonderful to know this truth, and then to look around at the other people that were there with you at the time and go, they already know this, or we're all discovering this together, and isn't this wonderful? So maybe you'll have some flashbacks about when you first heard this. Then maybe you'll have some flashbacks about when you had to implement these beliefs and they saved you from a lot of suffering and hurting. Or maybe you'll have a flashback of the time you were able to share this with someone else. And maybe you'll hear something that with all the other information you've been receiving about this Christmas story, that it didn't come in, and this will be new to you. So that would be delightful. I would wish that for you and me. And there's somebody here that really needs this in the worst way. I know this. I know who this person is. They need it really bad. And it's me. so I'm preaching to the choir here. Okay, so I wanted to share this story. And the nativity set and the pictures of Jesus and his birth on the beautiful greeting cards. We have all these vivid memories, and this is all about the light coming into the world. And what I think is very beautiful and special is that at the darkest time of the year, when the planet is farthest away from the sun, this light comes to dispel the darkness and illuminate the heart and the mind. And any time that we're in a dark place, either dark because the television has told us this is dark, or because something has happened in our neighborhood or our world, and we're feeling not real bright about it, we can turn on the light within by going to the source within us and letting that light shine and let it burn away the darkness. Well, the story began in Nazareth, where Mary was living with her parents. And she was a sweet girl, and she loved her duties as a young girl, and she was betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, and they were going to be married. And one day while she was at home, taking care of her chores and her duties, probably doing a little housekeeping, or preparing food for that evening's meal, an angel appeared. And the light that shone from the angel, the beauty of the angel, was, she had never seen anything like this before, and she was wondering, what's happening to me? Is this really, what is this? And the angel said, fear not, don't be afraid. I bring you great tidings. You have been chosen because of your ethics, because of your purity, because of the love that you have for everyone and everything in life. You've been chosen to be the vehicle through which God sends a very special child to be the illuminator, the way shower for mankind. And she said, well, this is just, how can this be? I have a really nice fiance. His name's Joseph. He has the little carpenter shop down the street. He's really handy, and he loves me. My parents love him, and I think we're just really good for each other. But I've never been intimate with Joseph or anyone else, so how could I possibly be pregnant? Because the angel had said, you are with child. And she said, well, the angel said, with God, all things are possible. And sometimes you can't explain how things happen, and you can't explain why they happen, but you can know the truth, and this truth will set you free to be able to sort it all out, that everything works together for good, and that if it's happening, it is meant to be. There's something good going on, no matter what the appearance may be. If the appearance is bad, something good is happening, and you to trust that, and then to have your periscope or your binoculars or your antenna in the direction and the suspicion that something good is going to happen, then surely it manifests. So with all of this, Mary accepted this as the truth about herself and what her destiny. And then as she began to feel this early stages of pregnancy, and she shared with her parents, and then I don't know if she told Joseph or not, but she said she needed to be with her Aunt Elizabeth, who was her mother's sister. So she went to stay with Elizabeth for several months. And the bluntness of this is that had she stayed in Nazareth, people would have talked. It would have been difficult for her and for Joseph, and so it was best for her to go and see her Aunt Elizabeth. It was also in divine order that she go and see her Aunt Elizabeth, because unbeknownst to her, because they lived distance apart, and they didn't have telephones or postal stamps or things. So what happened was, as she went to be with Elizabeth, she found that Elizabeth was pregnant. And this was astonishing, because Elizabeth was near her 90s. So I'll get to that in just a minute. But Mary represents, and now this story isn't going on in the Holy Land 2,1700 years ago. It's going on within us now. And when we realize this and claim and own these parts of the story, then being owners of them gives us the responsibility to administer them, to demonstrate them, and reflect them into our lives. So Mary represents that part of you that is pure innocence and is so fertile and available to demonstrating the truth, being the channel for the truth to come through. That when you know that about yourself, then that helps. There's no sense of self-importance or being puffed up, because that love just nullifies all of that, and so that we're functional, and that we deliver the goods, the goodies, the love, the thoughts, the kinds of gifts that love bears and brings and demonstrates. So Mary represents pure love, and Nazareth represents the place of origin for love. So she lived in a loving community. She was a love expression, and so then in the angel represents higher wisdom, and we all have higher wisdom, and it comes in the form of illumination, brightness, bright ideas. That's why in the cartoon characters they have a light bulb over their head instead of a fleet of angels or some kind of spiritual light. It's a bright awareness. And so when Mary then went to see her Aunt Elizabeth, and what had happened months before was her uncle Zacharias, Elizabeth's husband, was at the temple, and he was very devout, and he went to the temple frequently. And while he was at the temple, an angel appeared to him, higher form of light, intelligence, understanding, wisdom, love in action. and he kind of had to brace himself because hadn't seen angels before. And the angel said, "Be still, don't be upset. I have news for you." And he said, "Okay, what is it?" And the angel said, "You're going to be a father, and your wife Elizabeth, who's almost 90, is with child." And he said, "Get out of town." And the angel said, "No, this is the truth about you and about Elizabeth. God is always unfolding and expanding and stirring up the ability for good to come together for everyone's benefit and pleasure. And among some of the highlights of God's work is that Elizabeth is going to have a child. And this will be your son, and his name will be John. And you'll need to name him John at the time of his birth. And he is a predecessor of one who comes who is greater." And all of you Jewish people know that you've been living, thinking, praying, and behaving and being the best you could because you knew that someday the one would come who would set everything light and set everything right. And so that one is coming, and soon, very soon, and your son is to be the announcement of his birth and to prepare a place away for him. And they'll be cousins. And so this shall happen. So you go home and tell Elizabeth. Well, Zechariah was so confused and bewildered that he couldn't at first cooperate. So the angel said, "You're not on board with this, so I'll show you how I mean this. You're not going to be able to speak until the birth of your child, and your first words will be, 'His name shall be John.'" And so Zechariah said, and he surely could not speak. So he went home to Elizabeth, and she said, "How did things go at the temple?" And he started playing charades. So she said, "Get out of town." And he said, "No." And then the angel appeared to her and told her. Now she, like her niece, Mary, it represents love. But hers is a senior, evolved, mature love. And while Zechariah represents wisdom, but he has a superior, mature, maturely wise and understanding. So because of the height of experience that they had, being so old, then they had the kind of love and the kind of understanding that put together created this beautiful child. And again, you could say, how could this be? And the answer is, with God, all things are possible. And for you and me, all things are possible that we can want, that we can have, that we can demonstrate, that we can accomplish, that we can get rid of, that we can put behind us, that we can overcome. All those things are possible with God. And there's a pure part of us that's so sweet, and there's a part of us that's so wise. And because of the number of experiences we've had, a part of that sweet pureness is very mature, and a part of that understanding and wisdom is very mature. And let me tell you this, when you walk into the room and you say, "What did I come in here for?" The reason that happens for us is because we have had so many experiences and our files are so full that it takes a minute to get through all of that information that we've collected. Younger people, bless their hearts, They don't have files like we do. And they don't have as much to filter through. So they can sometimes find things, although they have their moments. They can sometimes have a hard time finding things. But for us, it doesn't mean that we're lacking or that we're growing old or that our brains are shutting down. It means we've got a lot of files to go through in order to collect what we are find the exact word or information or experience memory that we're looking for. So after staying with Elizabeth for a while, Mary went back to Nazareth and she was betrothed to Joseph. And it was probably a very sweet wedding with everybody in the village that could come, and they all brought food, and they played their music and they danced. And during the ceremony, the rabbi took the cloth and they drank a sip of wine together out of the same cup, and then he wrapped the cup in the cloth and put it on the ground and stomped on it. Do you know why they do that? So that it would, for as long as it would take to put the cup with all its fragments back together perfectly, would be how long their love would last. That's why that's a tradition. And so, but in the meantime, Elizabeth had this very beautiful baby, and the first words, and Zachariah just couldn't wait for the baby to come so he could start talking again, because all he had to do sign language and write things, and so so as soon as the baby was born, he said, "His name shall be John." So then they took him on the 8th day of his life, on the 8th day after his birth, to the temple and dedicated him to God. And it was on that 8th day that John said that the Jewish rites were to name the baby and do some other things on that 8th day. And they on the 8th day, that's when he said, "His name shall be John." And so then that was the beginning of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist he represents judgment and on the material level, and not on the spiritual level, but the material level. And oftentimes we have to get the news off the television that is all the material level. And that's John the Baptist coming through. And then we have to rise above that and wait and see and bless the waiting period and the seeing that we will behold as it all unfolds, and watch it all happen, because it's quite entertaining when you don't get all involved and you're not hurting and judging and criticizing and condemning and drawing lines to get conclusions before the jury's in. So John represents that part of us that needs to be in check. It's necessary. And John wore the skins of animals, and he ate honey and carob and locusts. And he loved those locusts. They're so crunchy. And then also about this, I don't know if I've told you this or not, but John was hairy. He just had lots of hair and lots of facial and hair coming off of his head. And he's just a hairy guy with the fur and everything. And what this meant was, now hair acts like little antennas. And so it picks up what's going on around. So John was really in touch with the earth and the world and what was wrong and sin and corruption and bad and all that, because he had the hair. So that helped him get his information. Jesus had hair too, facial hair and long hair. But Jesus didn't wear the fur, the coats of animals, but he was in touch with the world, and he knew what was going on in the world. But he had a part of his awareness that was devoted to the light, and his information went through that awareness to interpret it and see the good that no one else could see, to see what was holding somebody back that they themselves could not see, or to see what was crippling somebody that they did not have the awareness to know about. And when he pointed it out to them, those that wanted it pointed out to them and wanted to do without it, they had miraculous changes, because they got the picture and they took their old picture and just tossed it away because they had something new. But it didn't always work for Jesus. He went to some people and shared what the happy ending could be for them, and they weren't invested in having that, because what would they do if they didn't have this excuse, or if they had to apply themselves or whatever. So and that's real interesting to me. So but and then nowadays with all these men that shave their heads, maybe that what that means is, instead of having antenna that reaches out and is associated with the world, maybe they'll have, without the antenna, they'll get more responses from within. And the number of them that you see, maybe that's a good thing. There may be an enlightening that comes from within because of the practice of shaving your head. I don't know. And so then Joseph and Mary had their wedding, and then there was a decree sent out for there to be a census. And this was the reckoning or the tallying up phase. And every once in a while, life asks us, what's the score? Who's ahead? Who's winning? Where are you in this, on this path? And sometimes that happens when we hear bad news, or we see something happen, or we just miss something that could have really caused a lot of time and damage and inconvenience in our lives. We go, oh, I need to be thankful for all that I have going for me. And so that was what the census represents. So they had to travel about 85 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem, because Joseph's family was of the house of David, and David was born in Bethlehem near Jerusalem. So and Bethlehem and Jerusalem are 5 miles apart. So they had to make this journey with Mary being pregnant and on a little donkey, and it was difficult. They had to stop along the way, and it was not easy. But because God was overseeing all this good and all these lives and blessing Mary, Joseph, the donkey, the pathway in between, and the departure and the arrival, everything was working together for good. And they probably had wonderful stories of how people had helped them, and how the journey had, there was good weather and there was water, and things worked out. Well, when they arrived in Bethlehem, they went to the inn, because that's where everyone would be staying. And the inn was a large place with a big courtyard in the middle. It was probably like a Holiday Inn and Motel 6. And so when they got there, the innkeeper said, "There's no room here. You can't stay here." And to have a baby and everything, because Mary, it was her due time. So they said, "I just can't help you." And the reason that there was no room at the inn was because the inn represents the marketplace, the worldly, the commerce. And it is in the spiritual place that this birth needed to take place, not out in the world. And so there is a balance between the world and the spiritual, and we need to keep that balance. But we can keep it best by having first things first. So the inn was not the right place, but someone came along and said, I know that you're with child, and I know that the time is drawing very near. So I know of a place, it's not real fancy, and they keep animals there too, but it'll be shelter and you can have fire and warmth, and you'll be safe. And so they took this person, showed Joseph and Mary this place that some have described as a cave or a grotto. And what this represents is the very strong sheltering that goes on, and how protected they were, and how protected you'll be as you give birth to this Christ awareness within you. And you can say, well, but I've already experienced this birth. Well, but each day is a new day, and each day we have the opportunity to express what we already know and are on a more developed and mature level. So this goes on and on, over and over again. And so they had this beautiful child, and Mary and Joseph washed him, and they put salt on him, and this was, being the salt of the earth, means metaphysically that the real world welcomed him, and they were very earthy and earthly, but they took care of this spiritual being, and they knew that that's what the bottom line was, spirit first. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in the feeding trough for the animals, because then it was not on the ground, and they had softened the straw probably by crunching it up and making it soft. And there he lay, and Joseph just put his arm around Mary, and they looked at this beautiful little child, and they thought about the angels and Aunt Elizabeth and her mom and the wedding, and all the things that had happened, and they were just, it was like, wow, what does all this mean? And is this as good as we believe it is, or is it too good to be true? And it was just, it was true, and it was good, and it did happen. It was there. So the next thing they knew, here came some people. They could hear them coming, and they were talking, and they were shepherds. And you could tell they were shepherds because they had their hooks and their outfits, and that annoying little drummer boy with them. Da-da-da-da-da. And so the baby's trying to sleep. So, but they all came and they said, well, we followed the star, and it shone here the brightest, and you just can't imagine what happened to us earlier this evening. We were out under the stars in the dark, watching our flocks, protecting them from jackals and wolves, and all of a sudden, and we had seen the star, we've been noticing it for years, and an angel came, and it was frightening because we don't see angels every day, and it was luminous and beautiful, and she said, "Don't be afraid. I have good tidings for you. For unto you is born today in the city of David, the one who comes to enlighten and inform and turn on the light in everyone." And so this is that you've all been wishing for, praying for, affirming would happen someday, is going to happen, and it has happened. And I wanted you to know. And as soon as the angel finished his announcement, then he was joined by a host of, look like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, all of them oohing and singing, and so when they left, then the shepherds pinched themselves to make sure they weren't dreaming, and then they left some in charge, and then they followed the star and went to the light, and there they told Joseph and Mary what they had seen. Well, the shepherds represent those thoughts that protect the flock, those thoughts that are diligent, aware, careful, thoughtful, on duty, and also protect our flocks of ideas and thoughts and feelings and experiences. And then also people came to see this beautiful child. They had heard about it, and the world population wasn't as heavy as it is now, and a birth was even more special then. Well, I don't think that's any birth is very, very special. And you ask somebody who has a child, who has grandchildren, their birth, them coming into the world, is such a gift. And people came, and I'm sure that they brought food, and they brought fresh cloth and for wrapping the baby up, and water and nourishment for Joseph and Mary. The village people came, not the village people, but the village people came, and so there was just so much going on. Well, in the meantime, this star shone very brightly above and illumined it all like a spotlight on it to say, this is going on here. This is very significant and very special. Well, some astrologers from far away had seen the star, and the star came from the east, and there's a lovely organization of women who are known as it's part of the Masonic Lodge, the Eastern Star, and the star came from the east. Now we're facing east now. And all churches, great churches, St. Paul's and the Vatican, their main altar faces east, because it is from the within, the east, that the light shines, the light comes. And so you're facing the right, you're putting yourself in the body position to get the light. And everything you can do helps. I mean, you position yourself, you think the right thoughts, you do the right things, so that everything is in line, and you're perfectly in line with this by being facing the east. The star came from the east. It is the illumination that comes from within, and it shines on your illumination that comes from within, shines on everything you do and everything you experience, and it brightens it so that it pushes away the shadows and the dark things and trends and ideas and experiences, so that there can only be illumination. Well, and these stars, they just don't pop up. Your illumination doesn't just pop up. It's always there, and it's been there, and it's growing brighter all the time as you give birth to this spiritual awareness that we call the inner Christ, the Christ in us. So this didn't just happen all of a sudden. The astronomers saw it, and they noticed this star, and they noticed it was growing brighter, and they said, this is marking something. We've got to go, and we've got to wear our finest and bring our entourage with us to take care of our camels and pitch our tents so that we can sleep along the way, cook our food and everything. So, but we've got to go, and we got to take a gift. So they went, and as the star was brighter and they were growing closer, being people in a high position in their culture, they went to another person of the same caliber of position, and that was Herod. And they said to Herod, we're here, and Herod was real impressed with them, their appearance, their entourage, their big beasts, the camels, and so he said, well, what do I owe the honor of this visit? And they said, well, we've come for something very special must be happening, and because of this star we've been watching. Egyptologists tell us that in their discovery of the writings during the time of Cleopatra, that Cleopatra saw the star from Egypt. And so they said, we didn't know if maybe you knew, but supposedly this some great king or something has been born, and Herod, who represents willfulness, said, oh, I would love to see this baby. When you see him, come back and tell me where he is so that I can go see him too. And so they said they would, and they were so intent on getting there, and they were probably such sincere, sweet men, that they didn't see anybody's alternative motives. But so they went. Now the wise men, this is one of my favorite parts, they represent the wisdom of the ages, collected consciousness from past lives, past experience. You have this wisdom built in, and it's from being, since we're all as old as God, since it's from the beginning, and you can rely on these gifts of the Magi within you, and know that they'll furnish you and with whatever you need. So the wise men came, and by now there isn't anything written about this, but I think that Jesus must have been about 1 year old, because they had to stay, they had to be there for the census. Joseph could get repair work and room additions and tables and chairs with his carpentry skills, and everyone helped everyone else out, so some carpenter shop probably let him do work with them, and they could stay in that cave or and help care for the animals or find housing nearby, but they were there. So when the wise men came, this is all my awareness, they didn't see this beautiful infant. They saw this promising, moving around, active, beautiful little becoming person, and they gave gifts. They gave gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the gold represents the purity that of thought and love. The frankincense was incense, and it represents that, like the smoke of incense, the inspiration that spirals upward. And then they brought myrrh, which was an embalming ointment. And there are people that want to interpret this as though Jesus was going to die for and suffer, and so that was the little preview of coming events. But really, the embalming oil was to preserve, and that's the gift that preserves all the good and all the answers and all the maturing and unfolding that is accomplished along the way. And then as they brought these gifts, I'm sure that Joseph and Mary, just think of this beautiful young girl and this man who's just only a little older, look at each other and think, what are we going to do with gold? Nothing's gold. I mean, and frankincense, I mean, we don't, the cow there we could burn a little and it would help with the odor here in the cave, and then the ointment for embalming, what in the world are we going to do with all these things? But they accepted them. I'm sure they were very sweet and gracious, and they tucked them away in their belongings. And then the wise men were, they must have stayed several days, having made that journey for that long. They probably want to be there for a while. They stayed, they visited, they got to play with this child, hold him, watch him, look into his eyes, and he was becoming aware, so that the journey was worth it. And then an angel appeared to them and said, "Don't be afraid." So when we get these bright ideas that say, you could do this, you could do that, you could get over this, you could start this, you could stop that, we go, oh, what is this? And we would want to hear the words of the angels that say, don't be afraid. Don't let your fear or your, well, I can't do this or I can't have that, don't let that interfere. And instead, see the possibilities. Don't be afraid. Don't close off your ability to see this gift that has come to you in this burst of light or life. And so the angel said to the wise men, don't go back to see Herod, but instead go home a different way. And the point here is that when you experience and behold this blessed event that takes place within you, you can't go back where you came from the same way. You have to think of different routes and different ways because you have different values and a different perspective and a different direction. So they returned home without seeing Herod. Now, Herod, he was willful, and he represents willfulness. And we need will. I will get this done. I will be there. I will do what I said I'm going to do. I will do it when I said I was going to do it. But if we are so driven that we become hard and hardened and willful, then we become rigid, and that doesn't bend, it breaks. Instead, what we can do is choose to be willing, and not my willfulness, but thy willingness be done. And poor old Herod didn't understand that, and he had a difficult time. And because of his rigidness, everyone felt it, and then they reacted against him, and his whole kingdom was not a happy place, because he, being the source and the ruler, could have made it a happy place. It could have been a prosperous, rich, lovely oasis in a really dry and dusty little world, but he couldn't become willing. He had to be willful. And so then Joseph and Mary were guided to leave Bethlehem and go live in Egypt, where they lived for about 12 years until they returned to the temple, where Jesus talked to the priests and the rabbis in the temple. And on their way, they were illegal aliens. They had to go to a foreign country, long trip, and they had, because of one of their ancestors whose name was Joseph, it was really difficult for Jewish people to find a way, to make a way, to get jobs, to be accepted, and they would all live in little Jewish communities. And then it was expensive. And what do you think paid their way? They had gold, they had frankincense, and they had myrrh, rich resources, enough wealth to last them 12 years with some odd carpentry jobs, and there's not a lot of forests in Egypt. So I don't know how much it would cost you to live for 12 years, but it would be a small fortune, and you'll attract it, and you've earned it, and you'll manage it creatively, and you'll tithe, and it'll multiply. But along that way, their needs, they were cared for, they were furnished, they had everything they could want, including a beautiful child, and the love of each other, and all these memories of angels and destinies that were meant to be, and things that fell into place, and light that shone all around them. And when we see this happening in the Christmas story, as we have heard it all our lives, and then we see it happening within us, then we can truly say this is a special time for our planet. It is a special time for our friends and family, and it is a special time for us. And then, rather than just watch it or look at it from the outside of a Christmas card, we want to dive right into it and say, this is my story. This is me. And as it has come to play in the real world, I know it really happened, but also I know that its real happening is to convey a spiritual meaning. I get the spiritual meaning. It is my essence and my passion for life, and I'm going to show it and demonstrate it, not by telling everybody the story, but by making the story my own and making it come alive in me, and letting my light of love and understanding and wisdom shine and be shared with everyone. And so that is it. It is so. Amen.
Thank you so much.